Well, it's about time I get this over with. Bravely Default was an RPG released in Japan on the 3DS in 2012. It utilizes a mechanic known as the Brave and Default system, where if you defend, or default as it's referred to here, your character gets Brave points. Your characters can also Brave to take multiple actions in a single turn to expand your battle strategies. Those mechanics, paired with a refined job system featured in several other RPGs, made Bravely Default stand out amongst its contemporaries at the time. It was critically acclaimed to the point where it got an updated re-release titled For the Sequel, just like all good games do. That's also the version regions outside of Japan got when the game was localized in the following years. It was just as well received over here in the West, however, there are unfortunately several notable issues with it. Looking back, some of the jobs are severely outclassed by others, not to mention their level up skill charts are bloated with some abilities that serve little purpose. And that's not mentioning the fact that the devs had this genius idea to make you redo a good portion of the game 5 or 6 times, which totally wouldn't end up being quite possibly the worst case of padding I've ever seen in anything ever. But hey, the game was still great, and you know, those are issues that a sequel could in fact fix. Bravely Second released a few years later to a more mixed, albeit overall positive reception. It featured several quality of life improvements, a brand new batch of incredibly creative jobs opening up the door for strategies even more, and the pacing wasn't total garbage this time. It still takes like 60 hours to finish, and yet it feels like half of that just because of how fun it is. I know a lot of people out there don't like the shift in tone, as on occasion the game has some admittedly cringeworthy writing that you'll only like if you're a lonely 14-year-old. And they weren't able to bring the composer for the first game, Revo, back on board, and the soundtrack, while still good, is a lot different than Default's, and too many songs sound similar to one another. But personally, I think the expanded and improved job roster alongside the many issues that were fixed make this not only one of the best sequels to any game I've ever played, but probably my favorite game in general. Ignoring this one, and this one, and this one, and this. But yeah, while I don't talk about it much, Bravely Second is like one of my top 3 favorite games ever, and I'll always love it. Unfortunately, like I stated earlier, some people didn't like some of the changes here, and while a couple of the problems people have with it are pretty valid, I'ma be real, there's a lot of bad faith criticism that, while I'd love to talk about here, it's not the topic of discussion at the moment. Anyway, this odd reception alongside Second not getting as much attention as its predecessor made me believe that we might never see a follow-up, which really sucked because the formula got improved in so many ways here that it'd be a shame to never see it expanded upon any further. So after a few years, I became content with the series ending in a wonderful little duology and never expected there to be a third game. And then there was. During the 2019 Game Awards, Square Enix came to make an announcement. They got the whole squad together, they got Revo back, and they were going to bring Bravely Default back and better than ever with the reveal trailer for Bravely Bravely Default 2. Don't ask me why it's called that, but hey, needless to say, my logo genes activated and I regained my will to live after having to watch the Game Awards for 2 hours. Finally, they were making another Bravely game, and on the Switch no less. Fast forward a few months later and more information about the game was released, eventually leading to a demo becoming available alongside a survey for players to provide feedback to help improve the final product. I downloaded it as soon as I could, I checked out all of the jobs and changes, and I put it down in 15 minutes. Because I hated it. I turned so quickly on what was a greatly anticipated follow-up to one of my favorite games of all time. How strange. There were a lot of changes present in that demo that I really didn't like, and I went to that survey immediately and added my 2 cents to it like a Captain Falcon main contacting customer support because his side B didn't connect one time. Over time, they showed off some of the changes made due to the feedback and released another demo, but after the first one left such a horrid taste in my mouth, my hype for this game was completely dead in the water in such a short period of time. However, I did my best to not bash a game that had yet to release, so launch day came and I decided to go get it so I could have a proper opinion on it. I went to Walmart and they didn't have it. Strangely enough though, they did have Bravely Second. I think that might have been a sign from God to go play that instead, but unfortunately I didn't heed his warning. So after confusing the guy at Best Buy because these games have stupid titles, I got my hands on Bravely Default 2 and gave it its fair shot. The following 2 months was filled with frustration, bafflement, and a lot of tweets of me complaining about how this is the worst game ever. Meanwhile, just about everywhere else you look, you'll see countless positive reviews on how this is a return to form for RPGs, and a way better sequel than whatever Bravely Second was. And while everyone is entitled to their opinions, I obviously couldn't disagree more with this sentiment. So let me tell you why I personally think Bravely Default 2 can't do anything right. So let's start with some of the more tame things I take issue with. First off, the presentation as a whole. A lot of series that lived on the 3DS had to jump ship from a handheld to a home console when the Switch was released. And just because you're moving to better hardware, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to make the transition. Some games did it perfectly fine, while others lost something when making the shift. A Fire Emblem lost a lot of utility due to the lack of a second screen, making it more time consuming to scope out enemy stats and skills. Pokemon's graphical issues became far more apparent, and games like Bowser's Inside Story weren't able to be put on the platform due to its reliance on 2 screens. And Bravely Default 2 unfortunately suffered as well. Not that the game looks bad by any means, the backgrounds still look as great as ever, however everything else just looks like a polished up 3DS game. The series uses chibi styled models that worked really well considering that the 3DS couldn't do overly detailed models without sacrificing performance. The cutscenes were presented on top of full views of the background of the current area you're in, which made it look like you were watching a bunch of dolls on top of a play background, only occasionally using the environment for more action-focused sequences. Bravely Default 2 does the same thing, and that's kind of the problem. I don't really think it looks as good due to the larger resolution of the Switch's screen, and on a TV or PC monitor, it just looks awkward in comparison to other RPGs on the same platform. On a handheld, not only do these work stylistically, but they also work around hardware limitations. On a home console, on the other hand, it just looks like nothing is going on. It feels like they tried to find a weird in-between of more detailed models and the old chibi style, and to me at least, they failed. They're too detailed to be charming and cutesy, but not detailed enough to look visually impressive. On 3DS, the rough, less detailed models with beady looking eyes make total sense and still look appealing. Meanwhile here, I feel like they failed to recapture the charm. Ironically, this is the one time I would have been okay with them stepping away from the series norms and ditching this presentation style altogether, in favor of more cutscenes taking place in the various environments and giving us even more detailed models akin to those used for the opening movies for the first 2 games. Just go easy on the lips, please. But, now I'm going to complain about the game's UI for an obscene period of time. Look, I understand that there's nothing that could be done about it, but the bottom screen made for much better menu navigation in the first 2 games than whatever this is. There was plenty of room for all of your spells, the sound design was nice, and carefully planning out all of your party members' moves was really fun because of this good, concise menu. Of course, they can't replicate that on Switch, but the compromise they made is just... I hate it. Default and Second had this appealing layout for all their menus, and Second has this elegant track accompanying the status screen that made selecting your next job so relaxing. In Default 2, everything has this brown papery design. It looks like literally any RPG could use this same menu background. You could make more pleasant menu designs in RPG Maker. The sound effects are all clicky and clacky, and I don't like it, and the worst of all of the characters talk during battle.
Maelstrom of magic assail you! Primordial forces consume you! Maelstrom of magic!
I get that a lot of modern RPGs do this, and some of them fall victim to redundant dialogue, but here, every single time you brave or cast a spell, the character you're using feels the need to speak, and depending on your battle speed, the voice lines will stack on top of each other, and it gets obnoxious after just a few minutes of battling.
I've got so much more to give!
If you're totally cool with the presentation as a whole, I get where you're coming from, and I'm not going to try to change your mind, but I just want to provide my perspective on things, and I expect you to treat me the same. As unpleasing as the presentation is to me, though, there's nothing quite as obscene in this game as the gameplay. The combat in Bravely Default and Second is some of the best combat I've ever seen in a game. You can mix and match a bunch of different jobs, and in tandem with the Bravely Default mechanics, the strategies you can pull off can get insane. Not to say these games were without their issues. After all, there were some really broken strategies that can turn some bosses into a joke, but it takes a lot of effort to make the builds that allow you to use those broken strats, and there are plenty of other viable, more balanced strategies you can use if you don't want to completely break the game. Bravely Default 2 undoes almost all of this with one simple change. The turn order. Default and second have you choose all of your party members' actions at the same time. They won't necessarily attack in that order, but this turn order makes it easier for you to plan out and execute your strategies. Default 2, for a reason I could never possibly fathom, decided to change it to where you now choose everyone's turn individually. This was an immediate turnoff for me when the demo was first released, but surprisingly, I actually think this change could have worked if it wasn't for the piss bar. You know how in games like in Final Fantasy you have to wait for a character's bar to fill up in order for them to get a turn? BD2 works the same way, but it's not in real time. Instead, when a character takes their turn, everyone else's meter will begin to fill up. When it reaches its max, then they'll get their turn. That last sentence spells everything wrong with this new system. The piss bar completely disrupts the flow of the game. If your characters all have different jobs, which of course you would, doing otherwise would make this game even more boring, all of your characters will be completely out of sync with each other. Some builds will lead to characters taking forever to get max VP and have their turn skipped over by everyone else several times because everyone else is just so much faster. Because of this, certain jobs that don't have a high enough speed stat are borderline unviable and unfun to use. I found that Berserker and Hellblade especially got severely outsped, and any strategy I wanted to use that involved them getting multiple BP would end up taking forever due to everyone else who didn't have those jobs getting 3 times as many turns. By the way, the piss bar wasn't even in the demo. I mean, the same turn system was still used, but there was nothing to indicate who moves next. It was only because of the aforementioned survey that you can tell who will go next. I can't believe they had to be told to add that. On top of that, for some reason this game introduced a weight system where your equipment now has a weight stat. If that character's equipment exceeds the weight threshold, then they get a stat penalty. Now why was this a necessary addition? All it does is further limit your already limited options. Not to mention it makes switching jobs even more of a hassle because now if you have a specific gear loadout, then you have to painstakingly switch all of your gear every time that character changes class. And no, you can't save gear loadouts in this game. You know what game you can save gear loadouts in though? Speaking of limitations, most of the bosses are plagued with counters. Remember the Swordmaster in the first 2 games? Okay, now imagine if every boss had a counter or even multiple counters like him that were always active. And they don't just trigger when you attack them. No, some counters trigger when you use a specific element of magic, when you heal, or when you do literally anything. God forbid I use the mechanics of the game. And these counters range from doing a basic attack, afflicting you with a status condition, or even casting party-wide spells. They don't count as part of the enemy's turn and can be triggered multiple times in a single turn. Not only that, but there's no way to know what the enemy counters until you've already triggered it. Fun fact, I won't show footage of this till we get to the spoiler section, but the final boss has a counter that insta-kills a party member whenever they use a buffing move. Why? What was actually the point of these additions? What do they actually add to the game? No, they don't add anything, they take away from it. The pacing of battles is ruined, certain jobs are significantly more unfun than they would be in prior 2 games, and switching jobs and selecting gear is a hassle now. It's a poor man's active time battle. It's like they were trying to innovate because, I don't know, some person said that Bravely Second didn't change things up enough, which if you've played the game for more than 1 hour, you realize how untrue that is, because the first job you get in that game adds in a new mechanic that makes magic a lot more useful and fun than it was previously. Isn't that kind of the point of a sequel? Change is cool and can refresh tired mechanics, but improving and refining what's already there should be top priority, and it's embarrassing that a game that has the number 2 in its title is regressing from not just the sequel we already have, but even the first game. Want to know just how bad this new system is? What if I told you I soft-locked the game at one point? During an extra challenge fight, I had Gloria use Sanctuary, which prevents anyone from taking damage, very similar to Stillness and Calm from the previous titles. The effects of those abilities ended after a certain amount of turns had passed. However, because the turn order works differently now, instead this ability's effects will end once the character who used it gets another turn. Gloria was really slow due to this job, so Sanctuary would last a pretty long time. However, I did a lot of digging and I don't exactly know what caused this, but I think one of the bosses in the battle, Martha, had an attack that would lower the target's turn meter. And Gloria would almost always be the target of this attack because she had Sub-Job Specialty 1 equipped and had Shield Master as her secondary job, which gave her Protect Ally. So essentially the battle was stuck in a stalemate where nobody could do damage to each other and the only way out was Gloria getting another turn. But she couldn't get another turn because she was too slow and Martha would always reset her turn meter. I turned into Picaspri. The fight kept running for like 10 minutes before I eventually gave up. There might be a way out of this if you're really lucky, but this kind of nonsense would have never happened in the first 2 games because they don't have this needless turn meter. And if you can find a soft lock like this in the first 2 games, then yeah, sure, go ahead and show me. But if one does exist, then that just makes this one all the more embarrassing considering that this game is a sequel that's supposed to fix problems like this. Yet all it did is create more. But if you thought somehow making the battle system worse than the previous 2 games was a major accomplishment, then you'll be amazed at how this game improved the job system. The job system was one of the best features of the game. Upon defeating a boss, you were granted with their job. When using that job, it gains its own EXP and levels up, unlocking various skills and passive abilities. The best part about this system was how you could equip a secondary job and use any skills that character unlocked for it alongside their currently assigned base job, as well as assign abilities from a bunch of different jobs. It's not the first of its kind, sure, but out of every game I've played, Default and Second handled the job system the best. Most of the jobs were extremely fun and varied. Every time I beat a new boss, I would get really excited to see what new skills I had access to. Now, Default did have some issues with the system. Some jobs really didn't need 14 levels. There were a lot of filler skills that were pretty unnecessary. Oh boy, I can't wait to triple the encounter rate in a game where that's something you can just adjust at any time. Second, on the other hand, really trimmed the fat on jobs. Now each one has 10 levels with a bonus 11th unlocked during the endgame. Old jobs became better, such as Summoner, that becomes infinitely more fun with Spellcraft now existing, and the brand new jobs they added being extremely creative, Exorcist being one of the most unique classes I've ever seen in any RPG, which allows you to revert the value of anyone's HP or MP to the value it was at a previous turn. In Bravely Default 2, jobs now have 12 levels and go up to 15 after beating some endgame challenges. It sounds like the right balance, however the jobs in this game are significantly lamer than they were before. Let's start by comparing the Black Mage classes from all of the games. For most mage classes in Default, at certain levels you'd unlock Black Magic level 2 or 3s, so on and so forth. These skills would give you access to multiple spells at a time instead of painstakingly unlocking the next level of Fire Magic or Blizzard Magic individually. Guess what Default 2 does? A Black Mage has more levels than it did in Second, and yet it ultimately gets access to less, because instead of getting all of your level 3 or 4 magic at once, now you get Firaga at level 10, Blizzaga at level 11, and Thundaga as the last skill at level 12. For reference, you unlocked all 3 of these at level 11 in Default and still had 3 more levels worth of abilities and spells to go afterwards. But now Thundaga, which was previously part of a set of spells you unlocked at an earlier level, is now by itself the last thing you unlocked for the class for most of the game. How exhilarating. And they pull this same crap with Hellblade 2. Dude, this class is the biggest missed opportunity in the whole series. I already wasn't liking the game for the first chapter, but when Adam came in and shredded everyone with these new skills I'd never seen before, I'll admit, I got pretty excited. Then like 40 hours later, after I beat him and got access to this badass looking job, I immediately took a look at the skill list and 80% of it is the same skill but with a different element. You start with an attack that deals damage over time with a fire element, then at level 2 you unlock the same attack but with water, then at level 4 with lightning, then at level 6 with earth. Obviously that's not the only thing that this job has to offer, but having 7 of the 15 skills be the same attack, except this time it's green, paired with how slow it was, made me shelve the class instantly until I wanted to do surpassing power shenanigans, which we'll get into later.
Hey, is that one purple? Purple is my favorite color!
But I don't know what I was expecting because I felt this disappointment with almost every job in the game. Vanguard is a brand new job that in reality is just a Frankenstein of pirate and knight. They do this a lot in this game, mixing and matching abilities of old jobs, and the results are pretty hit and miss. Vanguard is fine, but it can't decide if it wants to do damage, do stat debuffing, or protect its allies like a knight would, and ultimately I don't think it excels at any of those things. But thank goodness it has the greatest skill ever conceived in human history. Pain into Gain, taking damage in battle while not defaulting, has a roughly 30% chance of increasing physical attack power by 1 to 3%. Oh boy, what are you going to do if your 1 to 3% attack increase? I'm going to do 2 more damage. Also, why does it say roughly? Default and second had no trouble confidently telling you exact percent. So here, why isn't it like, oh yeah, I mean, I think it's around 30%, I think. What, do you not know? Do you not know the internal values of the game you're making? Oh, wait, you probably don't, because you don't even know how to put the right skills on the right jobs. Berserker is a new class that's actually kind of fun at times that's unfortunately held back by some really stupid design choices. The whole point of the class is to inflict yourself a berserk to go to town, so let's have it where at level 9 you learn Unshakable Will, which protects you from getting afflicted with status conditions that prevent you from choosing your actions, including Berserk. If you equip this skill, you can't even cast Berserk on yourself, which is the whole point of using this class to begin with. And I get that the intent is to use this ability while having a different job equipped, but if an ability is in a job's level up list, then I expect that ability to be helpful for that job as well as various others, not every job except for the one that learns it. Bloody Minded, your attacks are unable to miss, but also damage you? In literally any other game except for Persona 3, this ability would be total ass, but I noticed that especially near the end of the game, jobs like Vanguard and Berserker would miss their attacks pretty often, which was never an issue I had in the previous game. So because of that, I actually had to equip Bloody Minded on occasion because I guess in order to have the privilege of my attacks actually being accurate, I need to sacrifice my HP. They created a problem that didn't exist in the first 2 games just to make this garbage ability useful. And it already takes up an ability slot, why not just make it where my attacks are 100% accurate and not have the health draining BS. Gambler, okay, this is just supposed to be a stupid job to have some fun with. Stats are hot garbage and the attacks are unreliable and unimpressive. Normally I wouldn't even bother mentioning it because obviously it's just something to dick around and have fun with, even though every job in the previous games were fun and actually useful. However, Gambler gets a special mention because rare talent is supposed to help you get rare items from enemies. But some enemies carry really good stuff that isn't categorized as rare, therefore this ability fails to serve any purpose in those instances. Definitely the worst job in the whole series. A Brave Bearer wants to be this badass final job, and I think it's cool and all, but it can't decide if it wants to actually be good or be a dumb gimmick. You have genuinely good abilities alongside, you do more damage the higher your playtime is. What, you want me to leave my Switch running overnight so I can do decent damage? Well, unfortunately for you, I want to play this game as little as possible, so I guess this isn't a very good skill. Red Mage drops the mixing and matching of black and white magic in favor of giving it entirely unique wind, earth, and healing spells, and the end result is not good. I like how the healing spells heal set amounts of health, much like the Bishop in Bravely Second, but that healing becomes pretty irrelevant in the late game, and the attacking spells are mediocre at best. Not to mention that this job that's all about using magic has a lower base magic stat than Freelancer. I think what they were trying to do is make sure that it wasn't too powerful once it unlocks Disaster and Chain spells simultaneously at level 12, but guess what? By the time you get to level 12, Disaster spamming is the only thing this job is good for. Speaking of one-trick ponies, Thief is the worst designed job in the entire series. Pathetic stats across the board, a roughly 25% chance to steal items, really pitiful overall. Thief wasn't the best job beforehand, don't get me wrong, but even though it got outclassed later on, it had some pretty solid skills and was just a fun job to use for a little bit if you were looking for something different. Default 2's Thief is absolutely horrible, and not only that, but it has one of the most fundamentally terrible design decisions I've ever seen in any RPG. All jobs in this game have a specialty that they unlock at level 12, Thieves being called Up to No Good, which prevents you from gaining BP and makes all attacks that use BP use MP now.
No, thank you!
I'm sorry, but I'd like to actually utilize the mechanic that this game was literally named after. But you don't get that choice, because this is a specialty, and unlike abilities, job specialties cannot be unequipped or turned off. So if you don't like this playstyle, then tough shit. Thief has been bricked, and if you want to continue using this job, then you're forced to work around this change. I would be totally fine with Up to No Good if I could turn it off, but no, I can't. I'm not allowed to play the way I want, and since I don't like it, I don't get to use Thief the way I like anymore. What a great reward for getting this awful job to level 12. Well, whatever. Thief is so bad that I was was only ever going to use it to spam Godspeed Strike anyway. Oh yeah, for some reason they buffed Godspeed Strike, which was a perfectly fine move before. Now it uses MP instead of BP, so provided you have the MP to use it, you can use it 4 times in a single turn with no BP penalty. Also, it does an additional attack later, which makes this already strong attack even stronger. Why was this necessary? So that Thief could actually be useful? Well, guess what? Using this garbage job for one overpowered attack isn't fun. It's so lopsided. I'd rather have all of the abilities be useful instead of one tower above the rest. But as we've learned, creativity is stupid. This is Bravely Default 2. And that's a major issue with the game's jobs. A lot of them have lousy or boring level up skills, but then occasionally one comes along that's broken, and then that's all that one job becomes good for. Godspeed Strike, Disaster and Chain Spell, Surpassing Power. Oh yeah, Surpassing Power removes the damage limit of 9,999, so you can do stuff like this.
Not hold back.
You got me.
Default and Second were not free from broken strategies either. However, the difference is that there were more ways to play those games, so if you didn't want to destroy everything, you had other valid options at your disposal. Because of the counter system, the new turn order, and the weaker assortment of skills in Default 2, however, you either take 5 years trudging through a tedious battle trying not to make the enemy upset and trigger their counters, or you shred everything with little thought or effort. Due to all of these limitations, you have to play things really slow and safe for most of the game, which is incredibly boring and completely different from the first two. The first 90% of it feels like a boring RPG with generic classes and tactics you'd be using in literally any other game, and then the last 10% you completely break it in half, but not in a fun way. It's in a manner where the enemy can't even do anything anymore. But if you even think about not cheesing them, then you're in for an extremely miserable experience. I have never seen anyone fight the super boss without using broken strats to beat it in less than 5 minutes. And I can't blame them. Who would want to do otherwise? I didn't use the easy cheese strat on Bravely Second's super boss because I wanted the build I used to breeze through the endgame to be put to the ultimate test, and despite how seemingly powerful it was before, that fight still ended up being really challenging. In Default 2, you slog through this boring 50 to 60 hour long game, and your reward is pressing a few buttons and becoming untouchable. It can't even be broken in a fun way. I'll admit, after I beat the game, I went out of my way to unlock some of these extra abilities. I found a nice spot to grind, and I did have some fun making some insanely stupid builds. Then I killed a bunch of the super bosses in one turn and said, yeah, that was cool. And then the novelty wore off and I stopped playing. Oh, also, quality of life is dead. Like I stated earlier, you can't save equipment builds anymore in the one game where I really feel like it was needed. And also the encounter slider is nowhere to be seen. Normally having overworld encounters instead of random encounters would be an improvement, but Default and Second made up for having those random encounters by having a slider that can adjust the encounter rate. You wanna grind? Set it to max. You're tired of fighting enemies? Alright, you can ignore them altogether until you feel like fighting or grinding again. Are you surprised to hear that this isn't a thing in Default 2? Also, Second introduced chain battles. If you defeat a group of enemies in one turn, then you can immediately fight another group and get increased rewards. Your stats and BP aren't refreshed though, and the chain ends if you can't beat the group in a single turn, so you had to plan out each party member's turn effectively to keep the chain going for as long as possible. Having to actually think and strategize for even the most mundane encounters is one of the best things an RPG can do, as it keeps you engaged throughout the whole game and prevents you from shutting your brain off and getting bored. Not only that, but the rewards from chaining are really good. You get loads of EXP from long chains, which cuts down grinding a lot. You get more from playing smarter rather than playing for longer. Default 2 sorta keeps this in, but you have to use an item first, and even then it's not as intuitive as it was in Second. The old system was perfectly fine, but I mean, you gotta innovate if you want to make a good sequel, bro, even if it means making old systems worse for no reason. I don't even know at this point, dude. Do I have to talk about the story? Okay. So I just need to clarify, this video's gone on for long enough, and I really don't care about the story enough to analyze every little detail of it. So if you're here for some deep analysis on the plot, then I'm sorry, I'm not your guy. I'm gonna be straight up, I think all of these games have writing problems. They had their clever moments, but overall the stories weren't some masterclass in storytelling. And that's okay because they're still entertaining and had a lot of unique flair. Meanwhile, Default 2 is as by the numbers as you can get. Oh, you go on an adventure to awaken the crystals of the 4 elements to defeat a big bad guy and a terrible demon of destruction. How original. The main party is fine. Elvis and Adele have some decent banter with one another, but ultimately I really didn't feel like any of them ever grew throughout the game.
Know a lot about women's feet, do you?
Take a look at Ring a Bell, Adia, or even you and see how they actually develop and change. Ring a Bell especially is one of my favorite characters in any game ever. And you starts out as a total dork ass and slowly becomes more and more confident in himself. Default 2 sometimes gives the party members their moments, but I don't think giving a character more screen time equals character development. Looky here, we're going to focus this chapter around Elvis and have him reunite with some old friends, but he doesn't actually change at all by the end. He just becomes slightly more determined to save the world as if he wasn't already. These aren't bad characters by any means, but they aren't terribly interesting. Seth, however, is terrible. He's supposed to be a shoo-in for the player that you can name after yourself at the start of the game, but there's really no point in doing that because he has a voice and an already established personality. If you can call being more boring than a cardboard box a personality. I don't understand the point of having a shoo-in for the player if they're going to give that shoo-in a personality in relationships. If you're going to let me name the protagonist to immerse myself in the game world, then make them shut up and let me choose the dialogue options that I would say in their position. And if you don't want to have them do that, then don't let me name them and give them a personality beyond, "Oh, I'm such a good-hearted person, I want to save the day." What about other characters like the asterisk wielders? I like Bernard because he's dripped out, he has a funny walk, and his voice actor is really good.
Please, dear fellow, fret not. All is in my capable hands.
Gladys and Helio are good as well, and I don't know, everybody else is boring. The asterisk wielders in the other games were all pretty iconic, and in second, all of the new ones had their own tragic backstories explaining why they're doing what they're doing. Minette and Geist are plain horrid. But no, this time there are a bunch of shallow ones with no noteworthy character traits. Adam, who serves the role of the intimidating main villain for a good chunk of the game and then gets thrown out of the picture as soon as you beat him. And then there's Vigentio. I get what they were trying to do with Vigentio. Basically, he was defeated by Elvis's mentor Emma, but ended up outliving her in the end because of his experiments in immortality magic. And the thing is, he's really damn petty. And they make this pettiness a trait of his. Anytime he talks, he's either boasting about how he beat Emma or having boring dialogue that's plagued with this awful speech pattern of his. I shit you not, there's an optional cutscene where he yicks out and goes on for 5 minutes about how awesome he is.
I win! And now I stand as the undisputed wizarding champion of the world! It hurts! The fear of death itself, I have overcome! I have beaten them! I have won! I have become the almighty, mighty warrior! I may have prospered, but only just every time.
Enough! What did I even expect at this point? I mean, for God's sake, there's a part of the game where you play Among Us. I think the only even remotely interesting thing in this game's story is the Knight's Nexus. It starts out as this generic evil force that's fueling the events behind the plot, but later on you realize it's something that's actually a little more intriguing. You eventually learn that the Nexus was actually a person named Inanna who stumbled into the fairy world of Magmel and drank from its fountain of knowledge. However, the knowledge of the fountain made her become obsessed with obtaining all knowledge of the entire world. After being banished from Magmel, she used her newfound knowledge to seal her soul in the librarian asterisk to become immortal. Over time, she became more and more corrupted and eventually turned into the godlike monster you see now. See, now that's a pretty neat backstory for something that I initially thought would be another boring thing that was only here because the game needed an epic final boss, but it's a little sad that everything surrounding it is pretty stupid. So the Bravely games like to be pretty normal for the most part and then gently take the fourth wall and put it aside. Bravely Second literally uses New Game Plus as a means of progressing the story. It's pretty crazy in those other two games, but here it's pretty half-baked and feels like it's only here for the sake of tradition. Instead, near the end of the game after Adam is dealt with, the party tries to think of a way to stop the Knight's Nexus, so they go to fight its subordinate, Edna. Edna acted as Adam's right-hand man and provided his army with all the asterisks, but in a shocking twist that absolutely nobody saw coming, she's actually working under the Knight's Nexus. She's also Adele's sister, and they're both fairies from the fairy world, which I know I haven't mentioned anything about Adele having a sister, but it's mentioned at some point in the game, and if your first thought isn't that she's secretly the masked assistant to the main villain, then you clearly have not played enough RPGs. Anyway, the party tries to stop her, and they sorta do, but then Gloria has to sacrifice her life to seal the Nexus away, and Seth doesn't like that because who's he supposed to bang now? So strangely enough, this leads to a bad ending that you're required to get. And then the party sees a vision of it whenever you reload your save, so they're like, okay, let's not do that. And then Edna becomes irrelevant for the rest of the game and is never mentioned again. Then you go to the previously mentioned fairy world and fight the Nexus there, but then they realize that this is a boss in Bravely Default 2, so it consumes their asterisks and they're kinda just screwed, so everyone except for Adele escapes the fairy world, which has now been frozen in time in order to seal the Nexus away. And Elvis doesn't like that because who's he supposed to bang now? So there's got to be another way to stop the Nexus. Let's reload our save and try again. Bro thinks he's zero escape. So you reload the save, and upon getting the final asterisk, Elvis realizes that the book he was given by Lady Emma is actually the book that contains the Nexus's memories. So you overwrite its save file, and with the help of the Fairy Queen, they find out that the Nexus lives on an island made up of reused assets, because I'm pretty sure a portion of this game was developed during COVID. And anytime you see a roadblock, it's cleared out thanks to the Cephs from alternate worlds utilizing the game's not Street Pass feature. Look guys, we're just like the first two games. We're breaking the fourth wall in a really uninteresting way. Guys, in Bravely Second, the Illuminati tried to delete my save file before the main character gave the title screen the middle finger. What is this weak-ass baloney? And then you fight the Nexus to kill it once and for all, and then it steals everyone's memories, and Seth gives them a pep talk while this music plays really loudly like it's a Sonic Adventure 2 cutscene. And then it tries to steal Seth's memories, but then you brave a bunch of times, and the epic music that haphazardly shoehorns in various battle themes throughout the game to sound epic starts playing. Alright, come on, Adele, buff the party up. Let's do this. Oh, okay. And then nobody dies and everyone is happy, including me, because now I'm done with this game. I'm sorry I didn't explain every last detail of the story, but that's just because, to be frank, it's really boring. There's little to no depth in any of the characters, the plot is predictable, the villains are bad, the only interesting parts are the chapter in Rheimdall and the idea behind the Knight's Nexus. And the finale is a rushed, confused mess that tries to be like the older titles when the rest of the game seemed like it wanted nothing to do with them. Bravely Default started as a simple plot, you know, the whole elemental crystals thing, but it had a stronger party and the story takes a drastic turn near the end that somehow manages to not be too jarring. And Bravely Second, for some reason, gets a lot of shit for its story. It's the #1 criticism I see for that game, and you know what? It is pretty flawed. It has some really corny writing and some random out-of-place meme references here and there, but for one, don't pretend BD didn't do that either. Let's not forget that there's a perverted old man character in that game. And two, I understand having issues with the plot, but the critiques against it are so blown out of proportion that people let it overshadow the numerous gameplay improvements it made. If you ask anyone who dislikes this game why they don't like it, then more than likely they'll rant about the story and won't say a word about the gameplay. And if they do talk about the gameplay, they'll either tell you it's good and have little issue with it, or make up some bullshit and say it didn't expand on the previous title when Wizard and Exorcist are literally right there to prove them wrong. Besides, you can rag on Second's plot all you want, but it presented far more unique ideas than Default 2 ever did. And I'm tired of everyone, including the fucking developers of the game, pretending that it's this mistake that doesn't exist. All because the launch in Japan was a little bit rough and it had some occasionally cringeworthy writing. Well, guess what? Even if Second didn't exist, Default 2 would still be a horrible excuse for a sequel. The original game is leagues ahead of this one in literally every fashion aside from graphics, I suppose, and even that's up for debate depending on your opinion on the art style. Default 2 is a far less unique, far less interesting, far less mechanically sound, far less creative game than either of its predecessors. And if you like Bravely Default 2, then let me just say,
that's good.
That's great that you like this game that I found endless problems with. I'm not here to ruin the game for you, I just want to provide my perspective on things. What I will say, however, is that if this is your first Bravely game and you really liked it, then I highly suggest that you play the other ones. I mean, heck, go play some other RPGs as well. Default 2 shares its platforms with a bunch of other RPGs that I love, and if you like this one, then you're bound to enjoy all of those other ones. Personally, though, I think those other games are where I'm going to get all of my enjoyment from now on. This one completely killed my enthusiasm for this series. I know I shouldn't say that, but the reception this game got from general audiences gives me the feeling that if there is a Default 3 or Bravely 3rd or whatever, it's just going to be more of the same. And honestly, if I see that the turn order hasn't changed or that the counter system is still in place, then that's an immediate no from me and I'm done with this series for good. There are several other games I'd consider among my least favorites, but those all have enough qualities that make me not hate them that much. For this title, on the other hand, aside from a couple of solid jobs and good songs, there's very little positive I can take away from it. And I'm not looking forward to what the future has in store for this series. But like I said before, I was content with there just being 2 titles I loved, and it seems like it's gonna stay that way. I'm Luggo the Luggician, and yeah.